Passionate, outspoken, insightful. Ariva Martin is an award-winning civil rights attorney, best-selling author, legal commentator, and America's advocate. Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
Number of essential workers who are contracting and dying from COVID-19. See, not much has changed in the last 3 months. And sadly, the brunt of this devastation is falling on the Latinx community. Let's discuss. It's Legends Week on the special report. From Reverend Jesse Jackson to my next guest, Dolores Huerta, we are talking to this nation's iconic social justice warriors. Dolores Huerta is a legendary labor leader and civil rights activist. Along with Cesar Chavez, she co founded the National Farm Workers Association, which later became the United Farm Workers Union. Ms. Huerta received a Presidential Medal of Freedom and was the first Latina inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. In California, April 10th is Dolores Huerta Day. Welcome to the show, Ms. Huerta. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You have been on the front lines fighting for the rights of workers for 6 or 7 decades. And we know in 1962, you formed the National Farm Workers Association with Cesar Chavez to advocate for the rights of farm workers. And you've continued that fight. So when you see what's happening now, Ms. Huerta, with farm workers around COVID-19, how does that make you feel when we look at the disproportionate number of those workers that are being infected and actually dying from COVID-19?
Well, I think it is shameful because, at the beginning of the pandemic, farm workers were never included in the recognition of essential workers. And they were like the invisible workforce out there. Like, so many people of color have always been the invisible workforce that keeps everything running. And anyway, and we have seen the consequences of this now, because so many of the farm workers in the Central Valley of California, which is now one of the big hot points that we have throughout the country, where we see that the pandemic is continuing to move very fast and to infect so many people. And I think it's a tragedy. And it really lies down in the way that the farm worker system is structured. We have these big agribusiness corporations. This is not a state in California of small family farmers. We are agribusiness. So a small farm in California would be 1,000 workers. And the employers are not directly connected with their workers. Their offices are in Los Angeles or San Francisco. And so the workers are out there literally at the mercy of the labor contractors, of the foreman. And many of them are not really up to snuff, we might say, about the way that workers should be treated. And so from the very beginning, they were not given the instructions that they needed. They were not given the protective equipment that they needed. They had to go to work. I mean, there was no choice. They had to go to work. They're feeding the nation. And so now we see the results of all of this neglect, what was totally unnecessary. On many farms, the farm workers actually had to come out on strike. Basically, they had to walk out because they knew that some of their co-workers were infected, and yet the employers would give them no protection at all. So I think it's really, really sad that this had to happen.
And you talk about those workers, Ms. Huerta. We know that a large percentage of those farm workers don't have legal immigration status, and as a result, they don't have access to health insurance. They don't have paid, sick time. They don't have access to unemployment insurance. So actually, they're having to make the decision between life or death, literally reporting that they have COVID-19 symptoms and seeking out medical help versus, continuing to work and knowing that they could be infecting others. Is there anything that's being done to provide any kind of protection, to make sure there's any kind of testing or medical care for those workers?
Well, we do see that just this last week, they started doing some mass testing of farm workers. But even then, we have heard that some workers have said that they don't want to get tested because they are afraid if they do have COVID, that they won't be able to go to work. And so then what happens, and as you mentioned, the undocumented workers, they don't get unemployment insurance because they're not covered by unemployment insurance. And the other thing we have to look at is that in the other states of the United States of America, farm workers don't even have that. They don't have unemployment insurance. So that makes it even worse because California and Hawaii are the only two states in the whole country that have full unemployment insurance coverage for farm workers. So that kind of shows you how behind the times we are in terms of treating that group of workers, of the farm workers. But, and this really comes down to racism, because we know that the majority of farm workers are Black and brown people, and they're the ones that are doing this very heavy lifting. And as always, the discrimination really manifests itself in times like this when we have a pandemic like this one.
Is there any oversight, Ms. Huerta, in terms of farm workers? As you just said, that they're now being recognized as essential workers. We know that OSHA, regulates workplaces. Is there any, similar body, federal or state body, that's going into those farms and making sure that there are at least some minimum safety protection for these workers?
Well, actually, in California, we do have the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, under which they would have the authority to go into those farms and really communicate with workers and tell workers. And it's not the workers. We have to think about it's the employers, okay? It's the people that are hiring the workers. They're the ones that are responsible or should be responsible for providing them the protective equipment, for making systems in the workplace so that workers don't have to be right next to each other. So I think the responsibility lies really with the employers, because they are the ones that should know what to do and when to do it and how to do it.
And I know you've seen Mitch McConnell talk about the importance for him and the GOP senators in terms of this next stimulus bill, having a provision that literally shields employers from any liability that employees, face in terms of contracting COVID in the workplace, dying from COVID in the workplace. What are your thoughts about how, we as Americans can prevent, the Republican Senate from enacting a law that would literally make it impossible for the workers that we're talking about to have any recourse, if they are, stricken with COVID in the workplace?
Well, I have to say for them, it's business as usual because they really don't respect working people in the first place. We know the Republican Party is very anti-union to begin with. So it denies workers' organizations the right to be able to organize and help workers in the first place. And they would like to have all of these workers invisible. As I said before, like in slavery times, where the people that did all of the work, that nobody would really see them doing the work. And this is the kind of a situation that we have. So maybe one good thing that will come out of this whole situation is that people will finally realize that all of these essential workers that do so much for our country, that they need to be recognized, they need to be paid well, and they definitely need to have the kind of health coverage and attention that they need. So, but in the meantime, we do have this terrible, terrible situation here in the Central Valley of California. When we think about the Central Valley of California, we are only one of 4 or 5 areas in the whole world that has the type of climate that we have, so that we can grow all of these beautiful fruits and vegetables, that we feed the nation and other parts of the world. And yet this is a treasure that we have, but the people that do the work are not being given, the recognition they need. They are really the treasures that we have, and they need to be recognized as such and treated the way that they should be treated for everything that they do to keep us fed.
Why do you think there is this such a large disconnect? You just said something so important, and that's these workers feed the nation. And without their labor, without their work, these farms wouldn't exist. They wouldn't be able to provide, fresh fruits and vegetables and food to the grocery stores that then make, its way into Americans, to restaurants and to homes. Why do you think there's such a disconnect between the value of these workers? Why aren't they treated with more respect and reverence given the important work that they do?
Well, the roots of it are really racism. It comes, as I said before, from slavery days when people were not recognized for the work that they were doing. And since most of the workers that work out there in the fields are people of color, Latinos, African Americans, Filipinos, etc., that's why they're not given the recognition. And, because before, when we first started organizing farm workers, they didn't even have toilets. One of the big victories that we had with the Great Boycott and all those people out there that supported the Great Boycott was just getting toilets in the fields for workers, for men and for women, because there's a lot of women out there that are also working. And when you think about how demeaning that is, and dehumanizing that is, I think that's kind of the root of the problem. So now hopefully people will see that these workers, we should really praise them. We should be grateful to them. We should thank them for working out there and for risking their lives for us as they're doing now.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Huerta, for you raising your voice, not just in today's, situation around COVID-19 and its impact on essential workers and particularly those farm workers, but literally your lifetime of dedication to issues around social justice and fighting for the rights of labor and fighting for the rights really of all people of color. And just being such a powerful female voice. We need more powerful female voices like yours on these issues. So great deal of gratitude we owe to you. And thank you for, just never giving up on workers and never giving up on this country.
I would like to add that, people can help us right now because we know that the HEROES Act is right now being considered in the Senate. And part of the HEROES Act in the bill that passed the House of Representatives, there is what they call a hazard pay that would be given to people like the farm workers and could include the undocumented workers. So we know that that bill is being considered right now in the Senate. So if people that hear our voices, if they could really call their senators right now and say, please pass the HEROES Act and please include the hazard pay for all essential workers, not only the farm workers, but all of these other workers that are working out there that are risking their lives. One other thing I might want to add to that too is that so many of these families and the children are also suffering because now the children have had to stay at home for the last 5 months. And guess what? There are many of these rural areas, they do not have broadband. And so even if they do have computers, which many schools are lending the children, they're not able to access because they don't have any Wi-Fi. This is also part of the HEROES Act, and that is a provision in the HEROES Act also. So there's a lot in the HEROES Act that will alleviate some of the conditions that we're talking about right now. So tell everybody, please, pick up the phone. Like Michael Moore said, when you get up in the morning, what do? We wash our face, we brush our teeth, and then we call our congressperson, okay? In this case, we want to call our senators and say, please get off the dime here. We need that HEROES Act voted on and passed as soon as possible.
Well, spoken as a true champion and advocate. Thank you so much, Ms. Huerta, for reminding us that we don't have to be, quiet. We don't have to be silent or feel powerless. There's something we can do that everyone can do. We can pick up the phone, send an email, reach out to our senator on social media, but get involved and do something because those workers are so important and they need to have our support. So again, thank you for your tireless work on this issue.
No, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, couldn't have said it better. There is something all of us can do. And don't forget, we can pick up the phone, we can contact our senators, we can do something to get that HEROES Act passed to provide protection for those workers. If you like eating, and all of us do, then those workers are essential. And let's make them know that they're essential, not just by calling them essential workers, but doing something to get them the support that they need. Again, just my honor to sit down with such a legend in the civil rights and the working people's rights to really, as Ms. Huerta said, end this discrimination, this senseless discrimination against workers, particularly Black and Brown workers. My next guest, he lost his sister. We're talking about essential workers and people losing their lives to COVID-19. He lost his sister, who was a restaurant owner and worker, to COVID-19. She contracted COVID in July, and after nursing her husband and her kids, who were also infected with the virus, nursing them back to health, she actually died from the virus. So please join me in welcoming Ignacio Silva Rio. Thank you so much, Ignacio, for joining me. My condolences to you and your family on the loss of your beautiful sister, Leticia. I think you guys called her Letty, right?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having us here. Yeah, my sister was a wonderful person, just a wonderful human being. And yeah, she's definitely going to leave a void that we're never going to be able to fill as a family. We'll do our best, but I mean, she was a pillar in our household and our entire family, and I know for sure in her house as well.
Yeah, we're hearing these stories, Ignacio, about, workers. I know your sister and her husband owned a restaurant. And did she continue to work in that restaurant, for, during the time period that it was allowed to be open? Did she and her husband continue to go to work every day and run the restaurant?
They were able to run the restaurant the times that it was allowed to be open. I know they had limited seating. For the longest time, they were only doing online orders, to-go orders. And so they maintained it as long as possible. And then they closed for July 4th. And it's at that time that they contracted coronavirus, COVID-19. And so my sister got it first, and then her entire household. And like you said, she nursed everyone back to health. She's a really strong individual woman, and she would be the last one to complain that she was in pain. And so after she nurses them all back to health, she starts developing other symptoms, and my brother-in-law takes her to the ER here in the medical center on a Wednesday morning, and by Thursday they intubate her. And so 12 days after she goes into the medical center, they pronounced her that she passed.
Did your sister or did your family, had you guys read the statistics about, essential workers and about, Latinx community in terms of how disproportionately impacted, the Latinx community has been by COVID-19 in terms of, having twice as many people in your community being impacted, being, actually contracting coronavirus and then dying at higher levels? Were you all aware of those statistics?
My wife and I had read some of the statistics that were going on, and it was because it's at least from what we read, it was a combination of being part of the Latino community and being part of large households and large gatherings, that when someone in one household gets it, unfortunately, everyone in the household gets it. And that was the case in my family. My parents contracted it, my brothers, my sisters, my cousins. And so they were all just doing their best to keep away from each other. They didn't gather for 4th of July. They hadn't gathered. It wasn't really until I flew out here on Saturday, the Saturday after my sister went into the hospital, that we gathered. And even then, we're gathering outside, and we're all wearing our masks and sanitizing everything as much as possible. And not being able to hug our family members is hard. Not being able to greet and shake our hands, shake one another's hands and comfort each other. But as I shared before, that it's, I much rather not hug my family for 2 to 3 months and then never hug them ever again.
Wow. And no, that's, thank you for saying that. And hopefully that will resonate with so many people who are having a hard time, either with wearing a mask or following the social distancing, rules. It's so important that we do these stories because they give a face to these numbers. Sometimes you can get detached, when you hear 160,000 plus people have died. But I like to have guests like you on, because you really give a face to, these aren't just numbers, these are real people, and they leave behind loving, family members like yourself. Uh, did your sister, do you know, you said you think she contracted it around the July 4th holiday. Was that a time period where she was back in her restaurant doing some limited seating?
I knew they had limited seating before they closed, and I know they were doing online orders. So we don't know how she contracted the virus. But I mean, yeah, I know it's frustrating that there are still people out there that don't think this is real, that still think it's some sort of hoax. And one of the common questions that people keep asking, and I think to a certain degree it's a fair question, because they'll ask, were there other underlying issues with your sister? And the frustrating part about that question is that there's a question behind that question. And the question is, if I'm healthy and I'm good, should I worry about doing everything I need to be doing and putting on a mask and, sanitizing my hand and socially distance? Should I be that worried, or should I just move on with my life like normal? And that's it. For me, it's like, no, we have to behave in ways as if we do have the virus, because you don't know who may have a weaker immune system. Because the only way we're going to make it through this pandemic is that we join together and we start thinking less about ourselves and more about those around us.
Oh, absolutely. Agree with you 100% on that, Ignacio. Just one last question for you. Do you think the government should be doing more, given that we're seeing the devastation in the Latinx community from COVID-19? Do you think there should be more information, made available to essential workers, more testing, more resources for families who maybe have a hard time quarantining because they're in a multi-generational household? Do you just overall think there should be more?
Yeah, I don't know what that more looks like, because, as Dolores was saying, when it comes to essential workers, they feel the need that they have to keep going, because there's a need that, if my household isn't provided for, if this virus doesn't get us, then, basically we're going to starve to death and
Mhm.
we will have no source of income. How are we going to pay rent? How are we going to pay utilities? How are we going to put food on the table? And so there's definitely a fear of, if I stop working, there is nothing coming in, or if I get tested, I'm going to be out of a job for several months and weeks or months. And so uh, I don't know what that is. I wish there was a combination of testing, quarantine, and sort of guaranteeing that, hey, we will work through this together as a community, and we will help you so that you don't lose your housing, that you don't end up on the streets, that we will help you with, food for 2 to 3 weeks, however long it takes you to quarantine yourself back to health, so that we can move forward as a country, as a community. And because that's one of the hardest things that I've noticed in my family and several people in our community.
Yeah. And I think that's what Dolores is talking about, and why she says it's so important that we contact our senators to get support for this HEROES Act, because not only does it provide support for the migrant farm workers that she talked about, but it also provides that additional stimulus check to families. It extends the unemployment benefit, because you're right. If someone's facing, do I go into this unsafe environment to work knowing that I can get COVID-19 and possibly infect my whole family? Or do I stay home? You're not going to be able to stay home if you don't have any source of income, because you're right, you're going to get evicted and all the other, economic devastating things that will happen to you. So I'm, again, my condolences to you, Ignacio. Thank you for raising your voice. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. We wish you and your family the best. And we know your sister, your beautiful sister, left 3 kids. Our heart goes out to her children as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, she one of the things, if I can end with this, um, people look at migrant workers and they look at them as just, they don't realize that the food, the fruit, the food that we buy at the store is there because someone is being underpaid. And it's the price it is because, you know, we take advantage of them as a society, as a nation. My dad came to this country as a migrant worker. And so we know what that's like. And our family has, you know, worked tirelessly and hard to make it and pursue, you know, what everyone here in the States pursues is the American dream. And that was, you know, my sister's goal. It's why she opened up the restaurant. It's the reason why they worked tirelessly, and they would work 12 to 16 hours a day, you know, day and night, putting all their money, all their effort into this restaurant. And for my sister, you know, it was the dream that her children would be able to go to college, something she wasn't able to do. And so these migrant workers, they're really hard-working individuals that come here and sacrifice everything so that their children can have a better shot at life. And it's something my sister carried on. It's something our family tries to carry on. It's the reason why if you go to, I know, my Facebook post, it's the reason we're trying to raise money for my sister's children. For
Can you
them
give us information where if anybody wants to donate, I definitely want to make sure that we provide that resource.
Yes, if you go to GoFundMe and look for Remembering Leti, and you will find it there. You can also go to my Facebook page. It's Ignacio Silverio, and well, you'll see this face there. And yeah, we try to post updates. But yeah, one of our dreams is to be able to fulfill my sister's dream of her kids, raising enough money so her children could be able to go to college.
Wow. Well, we'll definitely do everything we can at the special report to get the word out about the opportunity that people have to donate to your cause and to be able to help your sister's kids. And thank you for sharing those words. And that's what I was really asking Dolores was, you know, how do we get people to make the connection between those workers and the invaluable work that they do for our country? And, you know, it's a shame that we do dismiss them, that they become invisible. And as you say, we really exploit them when you talk about the wages that they earn and the low wages and the unfair treatment that they face to provide a service that's so vital to this entire country. So thank you for lifting your voice on that important issue as well. And again, my best to you and your family.
Thank you.
I'm going to shift gears a little. We were going to talk to another family member that's lost someone, but I want to bring in some experts on this. I want to bring in Sydney Benavides. She's the CEO of LULAC, the League of Latin American Citizens, the largest and oldest national Latino civil rights organization in the U.S., and Kim Cordova. Kim is the president of UFCW, the United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 7, and she's also the VP of UFCW International, and she represents 1.3 million workers. I want to bring in Kim and Cindy. Good morning, Kim and Cindy.
Good morning.
Good morning, buenos dias.
Great, and I know Dolores is still in our green room, so Rashad, if we could figure out how to get her back into this conversation, let me know as well, because I'd love to have her back in it. But Kim and Cindy, when you hear these stories, and you ladies live this, so you hear these stories all day, every day, but they're still hard to hear. They're still heartbreaking, and you know, I'm just kind of speechless sometimes when I talk to families and they've lost loved ones to COVID-19, and you think about these essential workers and how we treat them in this country. We call them essential, but we treat them like crap. I mean, so. Talk to me, Kim, what's going on? I mean, you're representing 1.3 million of these workers, many of whom are going into these dangerous meatpacking plants and risking their lives so that we can eat a freaking piece of steak. And what is it like for those workers, Kim?
So we represent, you know, essential workers that work in grocery stores, food processing, packing houses, healthcare workers, pharmacists, and workers are treated as not as essential, but as disposable and as sacrificial workers. You know, while any natural or man-made disaster happens, or like something like this pandemic, these essential frontline workers, they are on the front line every day while big corporate America is sheltered in, making record profit at the expense of workers' lives. And so this, it's part of the systemic racism that, this country is divided over right now. And that is, has a spotlight on it. It's always happened. It's always been part of, sadly, this America that we have two Americas. We see things through different lenses. Some people have opportunity and have privilege, and some people experience a different America where they're treated as disposable. These big companies are making huge profits while not protecting essential workers. And like you said, it is unbelievable that somebody's thinking of their cheeseburger. Wow, we have packing house workers that are dying, and grocery workers and healthcare workers that are left without the protection, without PPE, without paid sick leave, having to make decisions to go to work sick or face financial devastation. And this is the change that we need in America.
And I know, Kim, you represent those workers in Greenlee, Colorado. This JBS beef plant. There was an outbreak. 281 people tested positive, and now there 8 people have died as a result of working in that plant. And I know the plant closed for a period, but it's reopened. Is that correct?
Yeah, it closed for a short period of time, but with Trump's executive order to force these packing houses to open, it just shows that these workers are being treated as fungible widgets, as disposable and sacrificial human beings, instead of the heroes that are providing the most critical part of the food supply chain. They're processing the meat for this country.
And I want to bring Ms. Huerta back. Dolores, can you hear us? Ms. Huerta, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great. I want to bring you back in because I think it's something so profound. You started this work in the 1960s, fighting on behalf of workers. And here we are in 2020. Are you surprised that we've not made more progress on these issues?
Well, the political forces are the ones that are really keeping workers down. I know that the United Food and Commercial Workers has done a lot of work in terms of organizing workers. The United Farm Workers has done that too. The employers constantly fight and fight and fight organized labor. And organized labor is there to protect workers on the job, but also to advocate for them at the state legislature and in the Congress. And they have made it really, really difficult for labor unions to be able to organize people and to be able to raise the wages. And this is so essential because not only do labor unions protect the workers, as I said, on the job, but they are also creating the middle class, raising the wages. We know that our middle class in the United States has shrunk. And this is one of the reasons is because labor unions have been under such attack, especially from this current administration. And so this is one of the causes that we have so much poverty right now. The other thing I do want to mention, and I thought about this, about when you asked me, what are the causes that have so many workers? And I'm going to talk about the Central Valley of California. Our Governor Newsom, started out really, really great. He asked everybody to shut down back in April, and we did. And our cases were very, very small. And then in the Central Valley of California, all of our boards of supervisors are controlled by, guess who? Republicans. And they're in lockstep with the president. When the president was saying, "Oh, you got to open up, you got to open up," and that's exactly what they did. They opened up these counties in the Central Valley, which are controlled by Republicans, on the Board of Supervisors. And right after Memorial Day, they opened up, and whoop, the numbers just went skyrocketed. And this is what we're living right now. So we went like maybe from 100 cases of COVID-19. Now in Kern County, this is Kevin McCarthy's district, the leader of the Republican House. We have over right now 20,000 cases. 20,000 cases, of COVID-19, and about a couple of hundred people that have died in one county. And that is, that it didn't have to be that way. If they would have covered, if they would have followed what Governor Gavin Newsom was saying, lock it down until we can control it. And they did just the opposite. And so all of these, and this is why I think voting is so important. We're coming up on elections right now, and we want to say to everybody, be sure and vote, because we have to get people in office that really care about all workers, especially the essential workers. We got to vote them into office and make sure that they're the ones that make the decisions that we can follow.
Oh, absolutely. I want to bring you into the conversation, Cindy. I know you are the president, executive director of one of the oldest Latino organizations, nonprofit organizations fighting on behalf of Latinx communities. What has your organization been doing, in the last couple of months as these startling statistics, have come out in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on essential workers, many of whom are in the Latinx community?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. And I will tell you that for 91 years, LULAC, as a National Latino Civil Rights Organization, has been protecting and defending our community. And we just find it shockful that 91 years later, we're still protecting and defending our community. Back in early March, when we reached out to the CDC to ask for COVID-19 information in Spanish, their response was, we don't have it and we don't know when we're going to have it. And so LULAC jumped in immediately. We created a national campaign called Ayuda en Español, or Help in Spanish, to make sure that our community had a toolkit of resources, everything from what is a food bank and where to find a food bank, to what are the symptoms of COVID-19, where to find information, as well
I
as—
want to stop you, Cindy. Are you saying that until your organization got involved, information on COVID wasn't even translated into Spanish?
When we reached out to the CDC in early March, they did not have the information of COVID-19 in Spanish, and they couldn't tell us when they were going to have it. And so that tells you the lack of response, the negligence from this administration to make sure that all communities are protected. It is no coincidence that Latinos right now are overrepresented in terms of COVID cases. We're more than 31%. And we actually think that that is a huge underestimate. We know so many community members who are fearful of getting tested. We know so many community members who don't have health insurance and can't afford to pay $200 or $500 for a test. And more than that, what we're seeing is this massive unemployment that's happening, that's impacting all communities. And where our community is right now, they are, fighting to get bread, butter, and oil, or tortillas, beans, and oil, versus buying laundry detergent, right? Like, people are already worried that they're not going to be able to pay their rent, and they're self-evicting because they don't want to end up in front of court, especially if they don't have legal status. And I will tell you too.
Hold on, Cindy. You say they're self-evicting. We know there's been the moratorium on evictions at the federal level expired at the end of July. We know in the state of California, or at least the city of Los Angeles, that moratorium was extended through September. I think that's statewide for California as well. Where do you go when you self-evict? What does that look like?
And that's actually what has us so concerned, because we know that many of these family members perhaps will go to another family. So talk about multi-generational homes, and the only safety net that they have is their contact. So going to a friend or a sister or someone that they know, and taking up a room for their entire family because they can't rent a home because they're unemployed or because they lack legal status. And we're already seeing this in Texas. We're already seeing this across the country where the moratoriums have expired. And so our worry too is that as the Latino community continues to grow in terms of cases, in terms of seeing the number of deaths that are also occurring, and the spikes that we're seeing, that we will be disproportionately impacted, because we know that in low-income communities, hospitals are already struggling to provide hospital beds, and we are being turned away for service. More than that, it's ridiculous that wearing a mask has become political when we know that wearing a mask is complete common sense and that it saves lives.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, Kim, talking about wearing a mask, and we know in those meatpacking plants, it was back like April 29th or so where Trump signed that executive order basically mandating that they stay open even if they weren't safe. And you said that plant in Colorado closed briefly, but then reopened. And we saw some photographs of people in meatpacking plants with masks on and with these plastic dividers. But is that safe? That doesn't look very safe to me. Is that up to standards as far as your union is concerned?
So the workers, before that plant closed, workers were not provided the proper personal protective equipment. Dividers help mitigate some of the issues with social distancing in those plants.
But can we just show, I want my producer, can we show that photograph again? And we're not suggesting that this is the plant that closed and reopened, but this is one of the, country's meat packing plants. Even though you have those plastic dividers, you don't have people standing 6 feet apart from each other. So there's no social distancing. There's just this, plastic, looks like about a 3-foot plastic divider.
It's not the total answer to the question. I mean, or the solution to the problem. You need to slow down line speeds in those type of industries so that workers can be staggered and spread out. You have to fix a whole bunch they need a higher level of personal protective equipment, better masks, not the little flimsy masks. They're working in wet, hot, sticky, bloody, gooey type of working conditions. So the companies will only do what they have to do, or what they're forced to do, or what they're embarrassed into doing. Workers started to die, and that the virus went through this Greeley plant out here, and we didn't get masks until after the plant closed down, until after workers started dying. So workers there were treated as sacrificial workers just for the sake of production. And then you get grocery workers where we can't get enforcement for customers to come in to wear masks because now it's some political type of, it's a political issue to wear a mask or not. Where our grocery workers have to wear a mask to protect the customers, we can't get the customers to protect the grocery workers. And we're seeing grocery workers dying around this country as well. We're seeing COVID cases in healthcare. I mean, this is a systemic problem where essential workers are just treated again as throwaway objects instead of the heroes that they really are.
And I want to ask you, Cindy, so Dolores talked about the need for us all to get on the phones with our senators and get them to pass the HEROES Act. But there's also Mitch McConnell on the opposite side of the aisle from the Democrats pushing a piece of legislation that undermines pretty much everything in the HEROES Act and has this big provision that says even when employees are forced to go into these unsafe workplaces, if they contract COVID, if they die from COVID, they can't sue their employers. So what's going to happen to these millions of employees who are having to choose between going to work and possibly getting infected and dying versus sitting at home, maybe not getting any money because they don't have the extended unemployment benefit or they don't have paid leave? What happens if you can't even sue your employer?
This is, again, a complete failure from this administration. And just to point out also that at the very beginning of COVID-19, this administration was telling employers not to buy masks. And obviously, since then, they've reversed. And now, we're working to make sure that those protections are in place. And I'm so happy to see Kim on here and my hero and Dolores Huerta, who has fought for our community for so long. But I will tell you that obviously Mitch McConnell is not doing the job that our heroes, that our essential workers are doing every day. And I would dare him to walk into a meat packing plant. I would dare him to do the work that our laborers are doing out in the farm working fields, to pick a fruit and a vegetable, to make sure that the next time he looks at that plate, that he remembers that it is the Latino community that is the essential workers putting that food on his plate. And it's unfortunate that we're looking at COVID-19 in a partisan lens, because truthfully, COVID-19 does not ask you if you're Republican or Democrat. It does not ask you if you speak English or Spanish. It does not ask you for your nationality. And so we hope that Senator Mitch McConnell will gain some common sense to protect all workers in America, and that includes our workers who are brown and Black in this community.
Yeah, I want to ask you again, Ms. Huerta, you mentioned the importance of voting, and I think everyone, obviously, on this panel, we're all registered, we're fired up, we're ready to go. we're out there encouraging other people to register and to vote. But I read a pretty startling article doing research for the show, and it showed that there are about 32 million Latinos who are eligible to vote in the 2020 election. Many of them live in these critical swing states like Arizona, Texas, and Florida. But some of the voting rights organizers says that they're having a real problem getting these Latino voters to think about registering and voting, because they say their number one issues, is money and their health from COVID. And they're not thinking about the election and making that connection between, the importance of November and what's going on in their lives today. So how do we, make sure that people don't miss this critical election because they are so overwhelmed with what's happening in their lives today?
Well, that is, of course, our job, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, which is my organization, and LULAC, excuse me, LULAC and these other Latino organizations, and all of you out there in the media to really help us and to convince people that they have to vote, that they have to register to vote, they have to vote. And it's really sad because we know that there have been so many attacks against the Latino community by this president. From the first day that he announced his candidacy, he attacked Mexicans. And so we have seen, you see behind me that I have a sign for the census, okay? And, we are working on the census, also trying to get people to sign up for the census, because we know that if they don't sign up, they will lose millions and millions of dollars that will be coming into their community, and also political representation. And the president has done everything that he can to bring terror. I'm not going to say fear. I'm going to say terror into the Latino community. So people are scared to death to be able to sign up for the census. And all of that oppression, as you know, really makes people afraid, and it makes them inactive. And so our job is to go out there and to try to tell people, look, you've got to be counted for the census. You've got to register to vote, because this is where we can make the difference. And we have made that difference in California. We have to continue to make that difference. And in places like Texas, they're even really a further handicap, because in California, I actually passed a law in 1963 in California that if you're a citizen, you can register another person to vote. In Texas, they still have this archaic system that we had in California over 50 years ago, that you can't register to vote unless you register to vote with the deputy registrar. And those deputy registrars have to be renewed every year. They're always under surveillance. Some of them have even been arrested. And so, all of this fear and suppression of the vote in a lot of places, especially places like Texas, is what keeps people from voting. And so, we've got to break through that fear, both for the census and for voting, and do everything that we can in the next 90 days that we have to get Latinos registered to vote. So we have a big job on our hands. I think all of us, CBOs, the nonprofit organizations and others in political parties to, this giant that we call the sleepy giant, because basically that's what it is, who is now getting kicked in the pants to wake up and know that you can make the difference. We can be the deciders. When we think of who the electorate is, I always like to say that we have Black, we have brown, we have women, we have feminist women, and we are the majority. And I have to include white men of conscience, which, we know are also with us. But so we have to just make sure that we really work really hard to get the Latinos out to vote.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the coalition that you just talked about. I had Jesse Jackson on the program on Monday, and he's the architect of that Rainbow Coalition that includes, people from all ethnicities and races, and definitely, working class people and workers. And you made the point that I constantly try to make to folks is the importance of women. And we know that Latinas in particular, female heads of households, they have such an oversized impact on how the Latino community votes, and getting those Latino women, involved in the voting process is so important. But Kim, I want to go back to you a minute on this essential workers. And I'm having such a hard time, and I'm so frustrated that we're not making the connection between these critical workers and what they do for this country, and how we need to, start to treat them better, recognize them, and make sure that they get the medical attention, the PPE, the benefits that they need. Do you think if there was more of a campaign that showed the connection between high prices of groceries and how those prices are high because of what's happening with workers, workers who are getting impacted by COVID, who have to take off from work, or plants that are shut down. All of those things increase the prices that we see, at the grocery stores. Do you think if there was a bigger campaign around that maybe that would be impactful?
I do. I think that, the more that we continue to talk about this and bring awareness that, hopefully it will click to the rest of this country. I mean, look what's going to happen next year when the healthcare claims come in. Everybody is going to see catastrophic increases in their healthcare because of the claims. Had these employers been more proactive, their response to COVID been adequate and timely, we would not have seen all these, folks on ventilators and all these, disability claims, even unemployment claims. We're all going to pay the price for people turning their head in a blind eye to what's really happened in this country. And again, I mean, these workers, they matter. Life matters. That's the problem, is that we've become a really callous country where we don't care about each other anymore. And I think that there's been so much division in this country now that people aren't looking that we are all in this together, and we all have a heartbeat, we have a soul, we matter, we have families that care about each other. And, we can't turn our back on the essential worker. Like I said, in every natural or man-made disaster, these frontline workers don't get to shelter in. If there's a tornado, a hurricane, a pandemic, frontline essential workers clock in every day and risk their life. And they didn't sign up to die. They didn't sign up to die. They signed up to bag groceries, to wring out your product, to, dispense your medicines in a pharmacy, or cut meat, or make tortilla chips, or your tortillas. We represent workers at Mission Food Tortilla Plant. And so people just take for granted, they're taking for granted these workers. If these workers would have sheltered in, our country would have totally shut down.
And that's such an important point, Kim, in terms of, and again, I don't think we can drive that home enough in terms of how these essential workers who don't have the luxury, they've got to go into these offices, they have to go into these plants, these big box stores, these warehouses. And if they didn't, literally, this country would come to a screeching halt. So I want to ask you, Kim, what do you think about this bill that Mitch McConnell is trying to ram through the Senate that would prevent workers from having any recourse, and that would shield these employers who, as you said, are making billions of dollars? I mean, some of these grocery chains and big box stores, they're having record profits because people aren't eating out. They're going to stores and they're buying more groceries than ever. And they're making these record profits, but they're not passing them down to workers. And now they want to say to workers, come into these dangerous environments and you have no recourse if you get sick or even if you die. What do you think about this legislation?
So the immunity or liability shield is a death sentence for workers. That's what they're doing. What we don't need the companies to be protected. Many of these companies are foreign companies. They get tax breaks. JBS, where we've had the largest, or biggest outbreak and death toll for the entire country. They received $78 million in farm bailout money, but then didn't invest in PPE or masks or slowing down line production. And they've reaped all this profit. They've raised prices of meat, claimed there was a meat shortage, but didn't protect workers. Mitch McConnell's bill is a death sentence for workers. There is absolutely going to be no incentive for employers to have a safe workplace, because why? They don't operate a business because it's a social issue for them. They're operating a business for their shareholders and to put money in their pocket. They don't share their success with workers. And the workers are just gonna be sacrificed.
Yeah, and Kim, you represent, you're a union leader. Where are the federal and state agencies that are empowered to make sure workplaces are safe? Where are they in all of this? Why aren't they coming into these factories, into these meatpacking places, even some of these grocery stores, and shutting them down because the work conditions are unsafe?
because they've been defunded and deregulated. So OSHA barely came into our plant in the last 2 weeks after 7 workers died. They can't interview the 7 workers. They're dead. You know, and really they're short staffed. This is what the leadership in office has done, that what they're taking care of is their friends that are corporate leaders, and again, not taking care of their constituents, who are the workers, who are the communities here. And so OSHA, the CDC, they're just, you know, even we need verifiable and enforceable safety laws with, you know, federal and state oversight and enforcement mechanisms. And what good is OSHA going to do if you can't sue an employer? There's no penalty to the employer. This is an absolute death sentence to workers. And we should not sit by and just let this happen. These are going to be like Ignacio's sister and you know, my members, our family people, our members of our community. I mean, these are our coworkers, you know, people that, you know, parents of students, you know, our kids go to school with. I mean, our whole community has been turned upside down because of COVID and these employers' late, inadequate response to this pandemic.
Yeah, so absolutely, Kim. It's as a lawyer who knows how important litigation is, and it's not about even the recovery, the economic recovery that one person may make. It's about the deterrent effect. It's about causing the whole industry to change. And we know from the tobacco industry to the car manufacturing industry, it's those big tort lawsuits that have caused these industries to make huge changes in terms of their safety and their attention to details that, you know, make workplaces safe. And without that mechanism, we are at the mercy of elected officials. And when we don't control the Senate, like we don't now, Democrats, we are at the mercy of the Mitch McConnells of the world, which makes all of us really, really nervous. And it's really a scary place for us to be. I just want to ask you, Cindy, before I go, what message do you have to those voters that, you know, this organizer said is they're only focused on, you know, money and food right now, that they can't think about the election? You know, what's your solution to how we break through to make sure those voters are registered and that they show up in record numbers to vote? Because this election is one of the most critical elections of our lifetime.
Absolutely. To the voters who are tuning in, our greatest act of disobedience is to vote. Our greatest act of defiance is to vote. The way that we hold elected officials is to vote. The way that we speak up, we rise up, we show up, is to vote. The way that we make sure that there is change in America happening in November of this year is to vote. And so as we think through what solutions we want to see, what change we want to see, our number one priority is to make sure that we show up to vote, and to be very, very cautious, because there is no doubt that there will be disinformation. There is no doubt that there will be voter suppression. There is no doubt that there will be long lines, particularly in counties and cities where there's communities of colors. There is no doubt that there will be tactics from individuals who do not want to see Latinos show up, that do not want to see our African-American community show up. And so again, our greatest act of defiance is to show up and to vote.
And Ms. Huerta, I'll give you the last word because you are the OG on this panel. So give us some words of hope. We want to, you know, end this panel on a hopeful note. So what can you say to all of those people out there who are suffering and who are looking for a little inspiration?
I just wanted to share a slogan that I've come up with. You know, I came up with Si Se Puede, which means yes, we can, and yes, I can. But I came up with another slogan when we talk about the census and when we talk about voting. And I want to share this with my fellow Latinos on the board here and see if this will help us in the work that we're doing. And the slogan is this: Si no nos contamos, si no votamos, nos fregamos. Okay? And that's kind of a slang term. And the English translation is something like, you know, if we don't get counted on the census, you know, if we don't get counted and if we don't vote, we are messing up. And it goes a little bit further than that, but it's okay. It's not profanity, it's slang. Si no nos contamos, si no votamos, nos fregamos, okay? And with a, si se puede, okay, we can do it. All right.
Okay.
We're going to end on that positive note. We can do it. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining me. Just a pleasure to see powerful women who are leading the charge, not just for essential workers, but leading the charge to really change this country. You all are joining in that fight that we're all in, which is for the soul of this country. So again, thank you so much for your work. Thank you for your advocacy, and thank you so much for your leadership. It's been a pleasure sitting down with all of you. Wow, I get to do really fun stuff on this show. And one of the fun things I get to do is to talk to powerful women from, every community that is all, we're all joined together in this singular purpose. And that is literally to regain the soul of this country. And we do that, as my panelists have all said, by making sure we are registered and that we are voting. We're going to do a whole show on voter suppression and what we all need to know to be prepared for this critical election that's coming up in less than 90 days. So again, thanks to my guests for joining me this morning. Thanks to all of you for joining me. A big shout out to my production team and our sponsors. My production team is just rocking and rolling. We're having some of the best guests ever in the last couple of weeks, and I owe it all to them for the great work that they're doing, their hard work and tenacity. It all is paying off. You can follow me, continue to be a part of this conversation. Follow me at Areva Martin on all social media platforms. Before I get out, I have a few words to live by. It's just, I can't say it enough, and I've said it throughout the show, and I've just got to say it over and over again. It's so shameful that 5 months into this pandemic that we are still having the same conversation about the lack of safety measures and protection for essential workers. This is maddening. It's frustrating. No one in this country should have to choose between going into an unsafe workplace or feeding their families. The battle over safe workplaces was literally waged over 100 years ago. And here we are in 2020, still asking people to risk their lives. This is both immoral and unacceptable. My friend, my law school classmate, Michelle Obama, she put it best on her podcast this week, where she not only saluted essential workers and thanked them for their service, but she also called out the country for paying lip service to these courageous workers. In the words of our powerful First Lady, if we're going to call these workers essential, we need to treat them as such. That means providing them with affordable health insurance, paid sick leave, free COVID testing, and resources to not just barely survive, but to thrive. Y'all be safe out there, and do me a big favor. Don't forget to wear your mask, register to vote, and remember, we're all in this together. Be safe out there.
Thank you.